Okay, so I'm going to do a lesson on how to do a snow scene with a night sky. And if you were part of our lesson with CR School today on Friday the 5th, then you were in part of this lesson. I'm going to go do the whole thing start to finish so that if someone was not able to join us, they will have the entire thing. So what I did first is I took my half sheet of paper and I taped it down to my surface. So in my case, I'm using a cutting board from my kitchen. I like doing this because it has a groove around it. And so if water happens to run off, it will catch it in the groove, which keeps it from being messy. And I also need to keep my paper really nice and flat because I don't want it to buckle up or wrinkle when I add the water. And when I taped it around the edges, I taped it about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the paper. And I just used regular Scotch magic tape, but take the tape because tape is real sticky. And when you take it off your paper, you don't want it to rip. So I took it and just take it and put it on your sleeve or your jeans, and that'll just get some of the stickiness off before you put it on your paper so that when we take it off later, it's not going to tear your paper. So I've taped that all the way around. I have my cup of water and my materials. We're going to need for this are paints, and I'm just using a regular paint tray. Mine has 8 colors, but you might have more colors in yours. Our brush that came with our paint tray, and I've got mine right here in my tray. Paper, if you have watercolor paper, that's really nice to use, but if you don't, you can use any thick paper. I actually have done this same project on copy paper too, and it works okay. It's just that if you use watercolor paper, your colors are going to be much more vivid and bright. But you want to make sure that you do tape it down, especially if you're not using watercolor paper, because what will tend to happen is that the water on the paper will make the paper buckle and bend, and then the paint will run down to the edges. So you have your tape, your cardboard or cutting board to tape it onto. You'll need some paper towels and a hair dryer if you have it available, because that makes your project go more quickly because you can dry it in between. And I left out one thing here is that you need a cup of water. Okay, so rolling right along, I'm going to start by laying in my night sky. I want to, I'm sorry, I'm going to start by doing my drawing. So my drawing, normally when we're doing watercolor, we do our drawing in the very soft touch because we don't want it to show through the paint. But in the case of demonstration, it would be very hard for you to see it if I did that. So I'm going to go ahead and make some darker lines. They'll probably show through in my final project, but I don't mind because I want you to be able to see what I'm drawing. For your drawing, you're going to want to use a light touch. So I've got my mountain in there. Here's my little barn or cottage. Now for this, I lightly drew in the roof, but this is going to be snow covered, so it's going to be more like a soft line around it. And I'm going to soften this line as well so that it looks like it's a snow covered cottage. I'm just going to extend this down here a little bit like this. Okay. And then I'm going to have a door because we need to have a way to get into our cottage. And I'm going to have 2 windows. So it's going to be very, very simple. Not a lot of detail. Get my line a little straighter here. And then I want to just very carefully place in the trees that I'm going to have in my picture. I'm doing this very softly because I don't want these lines to show through. And it's very important when we do this, we don't want it to look like a real solid pattern of all the same looking trees. So I'm just kind of laying in about where they're going to be in the background. That's important to know because when I do my sky, I don't want to come too far down onto the trees where the trees are going to be. Made these a little bit high. Okay. Now I don't need to know exactly where, but just kind of a suggestion of where my trees are going to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and start on my sky. So you're going to see that I'm mixing colors because in nature, Things are not just any one color. Everything's a mixture of many different colors. So I'm going to start by moistening the background of my painting a little bit. And this is going to make my paint flow over the surface a little bit better, but not too much water. Okay. And I want to avoid the roof. In fact, I need to erase these lines inside here because I don't want them to show through when I get the roof. And we're actually not even going to paint the roof because it's just going to be white because it has snow on it. Okay, so I've moistened the back here. Now we're doing a night sky, so I need to get a really dark mixture of colors. So I'm going to start with some blue. I'm going to mix my paint right into the case, the lid of my paint container. And purple is a great color for creating a dark mix. I need a lot of it. So this, we're going to actually add some black to our night sky too, because we want a very dark color, especially at the very top. Whenever we do a sky, we always want it to be darker at the top, and then it will fade as it gets lower. Okay, and I want this a little bit watery. Notice I'm putting quite a bit of black because it's a nighttime, quite a bit of purple, and some blue. So I always like to test out my colors to see if I like them. So that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to start very at the top of my painting, and I'm going to paint this across the top like this. Remember, we want it darkest at the top. Adding more paint to my brush. Very dark. But I don't want to go down all the way with it dark, because if you look out at the sky, it's going to always be darker near the top, and it's going to get more faint as you go down. But I do want it to be pretty dark. But thing is, just be careful not to paint over your roof, because when you do a watercolor, the white of the paper is going to be what you need for the white areas of your painting. With some other paints, you can actually paint white over things, but not really with watercolor. And I'm leaving some open spots for the trees. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just want it to be pretty dark, so I keep adding more color, coming down. Add some water. If you notice your brush start dragging along the surface of your paper, just add a bit of water. Not too much. You don't want it soupy and running all over the place. You just want it enough where you can move it around. Okay. Add a little bit more black to the top of this, just to get that nice night sky, so that later on when we add our snow, it's going to show up. Okay, and then for down here where the trees are going to be, I'm just going to do a soft wash, and then I'm going to paint those trees right over it. So I just added a little bit of water, working around the cottage. Don't go down into the snow line of your hill. Just want a little bit of a soft blue coming through this back where these trees are going to be. And as I said, it gets more faint as you get down farther on your painting. So you want it to be darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. I'm going to soften up this line here. Now, I'm going to have trees here, but I don't really want white showing through right here. I want it to be more of a soft blue. There we go. Okay, now that's going to need to dry. Once it dries, I might decide to add a little more dark to make the sky a little darker, but this is about the color it's going to dry to. Okay. Now, if you have a hairdryer, it's a good idea to dry your paints, but you got to be kind of careful with it, because if you have paint that's kind of pooled up, and you put too much air on it, it can chase the paint off in different direction and leave lines. So I'm not going to hold the dryer too close to it. And this is just the same hair dryer I use to dry my hair in the morning. Now you're going to notice that your paints will dry a little bit lighter. So if you want to, you can deepen the color of your sky a little bit by just adding a bit more black and purple to the top. Moving down, avoid the cottage. Add a little water. Remember, if your brush starts to drag on your paper, you're going to need a little bit more water. A little more black and purple. Just to deepen up that sky. And then where I'm coming down here near the bottom, I'm just going to add some water and just smooth it out a little bit. Remember, these are we're going to have trees there, but I don't want it too dark there or else my trees aren't going to show up good. Wash it in between. And I always have a paper towel here to dry my brush or dab my brush on. I also have that piece of paper that I use to test out my colors. I'm going to go ahead and hit it with a hairdryer one more time. Now, right now it looks a little blotchy, and that's okay because when it dries, it gets a little more smooth looking. While I'm waiting for the rest of this to dry, I'm going to work on the cottage. I want to be very careful because if I start painting my trees now, then it's going to all blend together, and the green and the color that I'm using for my trees is going to blend with the sky color, and it's going to kind of just turn into kind of a mottled color. And I want them to be not blended in with the whole background. So I'm going to leave that for a few minutes. I'm going to work on the cottage. And for the cottage, I'm going to take my red paint and I'm going to mix it with a bit of brown. So I want it to look like not, very few cottages or barns are just like bright, bright red. So I'm just kind of like mellowing that red out a little bit. You can actually mix a little green too, because green is the complementary color to red. So if you want your red to be not as bright, you can mix a little green in with it. Okay, and then I'm just going to go ahead and paint my cottage in. So I'm going to take my brush and kind of roll it a little bit in the paint so that the tip is easier to work with. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint it, and I want to paint around that roof line. I don't want to get the paint on the roof because remember, I want that white to show through on the paper where the snow is. And when I get to the little spots, I'm really using just the very tip of that brush, gently touching, almost just kind of dabbing it in. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and get some more paint on my brush, roll it a little bit, and I'm going to go to this side. I'm kind of doing a little bit of a wavy line under that roof because that's where the snow is. Being real careful around the windows. Now later on, we're going to put some yellow in those windows as though there's a light shining inside. So I want to make sure that I don't get the red paint in there. A little bit more paint and just work these in. If you notice like a lot of lines in, you can just add just a touch of water and just kind of move it over your paint and smooth it in. Be careful to avoid the windows. In fact, we're not gonna add the yellow to the windows for a while because we want to make sure this red is very dry so that it doesn't kind of bleed into the color of the windows. Now, this side of the cottage or the barn would be more in shadow because we're going to pretend that there's a kind of a bright moon over here on the right. So I'm going to take that red. I'm going to mix a little bit of darker colors into it. Not too much. I put a little black, a little brown. Test it out. And then I'm going to put kind of a shadow right underneath the roof line. And right underneath my windows. A little bit on this side. And I'm going to just kind of skip my brush along the surface of it to look a little bit like maybe there's wood slats or something like that. And then I want a little bit of a shadow right under these, we call it the eaves of the roof. Not a lot because it's at night. And just right under here. Just gives your barn a little bit of, or your cottage a little bit of definition. You can always go back later and add more detail. But now we want to paint the door. We're going to paint it black. Again, I'm kind of rolling my brush to get more of a fine point and then dabbing it in. I got to get some of the water off my brush because my brush is a little too wet. I can always go back when this dries and make it a little bit darker. There we go. Okay. Now, before I even start on those trees, I just need to make that a little bit drier. So I'm going to get out my hair dryer. You don't have to use a hair dryer, but if you don't, you're going to need to wait in between till this sky is very, very dry. My sky is dry enough where I can start working with it. So I'm going to start setting in the trees, and here's our sample painting. So you can see that the trees that are in the back are lighter because when you're painting, everything that's higher in the picture and lighter color is going to look farther away than things that are closer down and that are brighter colors or darker colors. So I want to put a layer of trees in the back that look like they're far away. So I'm going to do a very faint color. I'm going to mix some green, and that had a little brown in it. I don't mind. I just leave it, and I mix it in with some yellow. And I'm looking for kind of a faint color. I'm going to gray it out a little bit by putting a little bit of black in it. That makes it not quite as bright. And we want it very faint, so you can even add a little bit of water to that paint. But then when you go to paint, you don't want your brush to be too soppy wet. So I'm going to go ahead and dab it on my paper towel. I'm going to test out the color on my test paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start putting in these trees. Now, I'm not going to draw them in. I'm just going to kind of do it by eye, but you can definitely draw them if you want, so you can see where you want them. But the thing is, be a little bit careful with that because you don't want to have a bunch of lines showing. So I'm just going to put one right about here that's kind of tall. And these are just kind of dabby and blotchy. They don't have a lot of detail to them. You don't want them to have detail because things that are farther away, that's another thing. Not a lot of detail. So if you look at trees that are far, far, far from your house, you're not going to see a lot of detail, right? The ones that are closer up, you're going to see more detail. So that's how we make this we give it the impression of things that are at a distance. See how I'm just kind of dabbing. I'm not even being real careful about it. I just want it to look like the shape of trees, not all the same height, kind of varied. in their texture, varied in their color, but very light in color. Notice I get dip my brush in the paint, and then I get some of the water off. I'm going to come over here with a pretty tall one. And again, this is just the background. We're going to be layering other trees on top of these. You can go ahead and with that color and kind of paint it down. You don't want to paint over the white because remember that white paper, that's the white of my snow. So I don't want to paint that green, do I? Now this doesn't look like much right now, and it's not supposed to. We're just starting. One thing I've learned is don't judge your artwork when you're in the process. Because a lot of times we look at it and we say, I don't like it. Or I'm graying it out with a little black, with actually even a little red. So remember we talked about how we can gray the red out by adding green? Well, I can also mellow out the green by adding a little red. But I don't want them to be really strong colors right now. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to lay some in kind of behind the house. And one right here. And just blobbing them in. Coming down near to that snowy hill, but not touching it. Maybe a little bit more in here of the color. And that's really all we kind of need to do for that back layer. You can add a little bit more if you want to. If you want to add a taller one back here, you certainly can. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit over here. Not too much. We don't want to overdo it because that's just a background layer. I got a little bit of green on my white mountain, so I'm going to take a Q-tip and see if I can lift that off best I can. Add a little water. I'm not going to scrub it too much. I'm going to leave it alone. And now I want to dry my layer of trees. If you don't want to use a hairdryer or don't have one to use, you can that can be your time to take your little break and go get a snack, and then you come back and it's dry. Okay, so now I'm going to come back, and you notice on our sample painting, this is the one I did with the Sierra students today. We're going to do about 2 more layers of trees. So the next layer of trees is going to be this value, and we refer to the value as the intensity or the brightness or the deepness of the color. So notice we have a light value, we have a medium value, and then we have a dark value. So now we're going to put some in with the medium value. You notice how we want to just kind of stagger them and make them different lengths. I'm going to take that same green that I mixed before, add some more to it. With watercolor, you kind of, it's just like a cat's fur. You have to go back and forth over the color. You don't want to mush it and squish it. And what am I adding? I'm going to add a little purple to make it darker. A little bit of black, not much, just a little blue. Okay, that's about right for the medium tone. I'm going to test it out on my paper. Looks good. And on these, I'm just going to go look at my sample picture. And I'm just going to kind of start laying them in here in front. And they should be a darker color. Okay, you should be able to see it on top of the other trees. Now, this is looking good because this is going to dry a little lighter than it looks here. I've noticed that acrylic paints tend to dry a little darker, but watercolors dry a little lighter. And I'm basically dabbing. Notice that I'm leaving some space where that light green is showing through. We call that negative space. And it's kind of like the pauses in music. Like you want little empty spaces where there's not a lot of paint. It's what makes it look natural. If you look at trees, you'll notice that you can see sky through them a lot of times, or you can see the trees that are behind them. And we want that. We want that open space. We don't want to just like color them in like a color book. Okay, and sometimes I add a little bit of different color, like, okay, I want this next one a little darker, so I'll add a little purple, roll on my brush, come back in here. And the other thing is I don't want them all to be the exact same size, either height or width. I'm making them a variety of sizes, just like people, right? It's like we're not all the same. And if you think about it, with these trees, they were all planted with different seeds at different times. So are they all going to be the same size? No. Sometimes you can kind of do almost like a little trunk coming down with the tip of your brush, and it gives you a little guide, and then you start going from there. I want this a little taller because I don't want it to be the same height as this tree next to it. I want it to look a little different. And that's what's going to make your painting interesting. Variety, okay? So we're doing a repetition of the trees, but we're doing a variety of the way the trees look, their shapes, their colors, their sizes. Just like nature, everything's different, just like people, right? That's what makes it beautiful. Adding a little bit more color, a little more purple. And see, I'm looking at my sample again. Maybe I'll come in here with one. Notice that these are drying a little lighter, so that's why they look very dark when I first start, but then they dry lighter. And then I'll do one right next to that one. And a lot of painting is just, you notice I'm dabbing, right? I'm not like I said, I'm not painting and coloring in like a color book. I'm dabbing and making it interesting. Notice that you can see the negative space here in this tree. I don't want to fill that all in. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it natural looking. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a taller one and make it a little slanted, because not all trees grow straight. Some of them are a little slanted for whatever reason. Maybe the way the wind hits them, or maybe when they were little, an animal leaned up against it. And so we want to just make them a variety of shapes, sizes, the way they're leaning. You have that nice negative space coming through. And then I'm going to leave a little space here. I'm going to do another one right over here. Okay. Trying to make a decision if I want to add any more. Kind of liking it. I might just add back here. I'm just going to dab in some suggestions. Like when I say suggestion is a lot of times we don't want it just to be a complete tree. We just give it a suggestion that there's something else back there. A suggestion that there's more than we just see here. So look at 3 or 4 dabs. That's all I need, right? To suggest that. And then it tricks the eye, and the eye thinks, oh yeah, there's a bunch of trees. Okay, then I'm going to come over here to this side. I need to mix a little more color, so I'm going to get my green again. A little bit of my purple. Remember, it doesn't have to be the exact same color because all the trees are different. A little tiny bit of black. Get it to a point. Come over here, and I like to put one about right here. Notice I'm not doing it directly in front of the other ones that are behind because I want them to show through. Do another one right here. Maybe kind of a tall one. Leaving that negative space again, leaving that space where that light green is showing through. And over here behind this house, there's going to be a lot of darkness because the moon would be coming from the right. So on this left side of the house, and it's kind of in a glare right now, so it looks brighter than it is. But I'll put some purple in here. And sometimes I just go ahead and I put my brush right into a paint and I just paint it on there and mix it. As you paint more and more, you're going to get more used to doing that, where you can mix it right on your actual color or your actual canvas. So like I mix the colors right while I'm painting right on the paper. And that's really nice because it gives you a variety of colors and not everything's the same. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. I think I just want a little bit of suggestion back here that there's more trees. Notice a few dabs. That's all it took. Dab, 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 dab. That's it. Leave it alone. So you don't want to do too much. You can overwork it. Okay, now I'm just about ready for one more layer of trees, believe it or not. So I'm going to get this kind of dry. Now you can really see that negative space coming through here now that they're drying. Isn't that lovely? It's not all solid, is it? So I'm going to come back. I'm going to use the same mix basically, but now it's got to be darker, doesn't it? So I'm coming back with my green. And what colors make it dark? Purple. I might even mix a little bit of brown in. Quite a bit of purple. Purple is a great color for darkening and also for doing shadowing. When you're using watercolors, you really have to work the paints to get the deepness that you want. And that is one of the challenges of watercolor. Okay, it's looking pretty good, so I'm going to test it out. Oh yeah, it's getting there. So now I'm going to come back in, and I'm not going to do a whole lot. I'm going to see, you notice that in our sample one, we have some trees that come down a little bit onto the mountain. So I'm going to draw a little trunk line with the tip of my brush. And then I'm going to just start a little bit too much water. I'm just going to kind of dab. And you notice this one, this looks very close up, doesn't it? And it comes down, it's like growing a little bit into the mountain. Now, notice the negative space. Notice that I'm dabbing, I'm not coloring it in. And I'm going to leave that one alone. I like it just like it is. I'm not going to overwork it. I'm going to do a little one here, little trunk line, some little dabs. Kind of comes down onto the mountain a little, onto the white. Not too much. Leaving the negative space. Add a little bit more color. Let's see, where else do I want one? Maybe right here, a little bit in between these two. Get more color. And this is where it gets fun for me because I love the details. And it's just beautiful to me to have that negative space coming through. Now I have 2 layers of trees behind these. So I even have more interest in my painting, more detail, more things to look at. So I don't want to cover everything too much behind it, do I? Make it a little taller maybe, dab, 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 and then stop and look at it. Before you keep going, you need to stop and look and go, okay, is it time to stop? Because sometimes with artwork, knowing when to stop, knowing when it's good enough is part of the skill. We could just keep going and going and going, but then we end up just with a bunch of blobs and it all blends in together. So we want to make sure that we're not overworking, overdoing. There. It's a nice little tree right there. And then I'm going to come in over here, make a little bit taller. And what I want to encourage you to is don't try to make yours look exactly like mine. When I first started doing painting, I was frustrated because I could never make it look like the instructor. And it just drove me crazy. And then I realized that, it's not supposed to. Because it's not artwork. If I want something to look exactly like that person did, I could just take a photo of it, right? But this is my artwork. It's your artwork. Okay. Let's see. Maybe one right next to this guy here. I'm going directly into the paint, when you've had some water sitting on your paints for a while, they're a lot easier to work with because the paint itself is thicker. So you can just, start painting from the actual paint pans and just get into the groove of it. Like you can put some music on in the background. You can just relax and let it flow, because that's part of what artwork is it's a time for you just to be creative, just to let it flow. If you don't love what you do today, you'll do something else tomorrow. You can redo the painting. There. I'm kind of liking it. Okay. So I don't want to do too much. I'm going to go over on this side, put a few little trees in the very front, making them darker. If they don't make them darker, they're not going to stand out from the behind ones. And notice some of them are literally just a few dabs of paint. That's all. I've noticed this one thing about artwork. Sometimes it's about what you don't do instead of what you do. Like I said, it's knowing when to stop. And I think it's about time for me to stop. Just want to deepen this one just a little by adding some purple. Now, if we were using regular watercolor paper, the colors would show up much brighter. But I'm using cardstock paper, so the colors aren't quite as bright. And then one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to pick up some brown on my brush, mix it in a little bit with that green that I had on there before. I'm going to dab it on my paper towel and roll my brush to a point. And I'm going to just pull some suggestions of trunks coming down. This adds a lot. Notice I'm doing just a little with the very tip of my brush. You don't want them looking real thick, so you have to, that's why you have to use the tip of the brush and make sure it's not too wet. And if it helps, practice on your paper, drawing a thin line. And then you just come to your tree and just pull down, pull down, pull down, pull down, pull down, pull down. Like I said, these things take practice. So I've been painting a long time, so it's, comes more natural, but you can practice and you can get really good at it. Okay, I'm going to stop on the trees. And those are going to look beautiful once we get the snow added on later. One thing I did forget is I wanted to put a chimney on my house, so I'm going to wait till those trees dry and do that later. While that's drying, I want to come in with some shadowing on my mountain, okay? I want to give it some texture, make it look like it's not just a flat surface. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a shadow on this side of my barn. As though the moon was shining bright from the right, I'd have a shadow coming on this side. So sometimes I just go back to my paint tray. And the thing about watercolors is even if they've dried over here, you can kind of activate them again by putting your brush with the water in it. And I want to gray it out a little bit with a little bit of black. So I've got a little bit of blue, purple, black. And like I said, purple is great for a shadow. Okay, and then I want to just make sure, I don't know what color it is until I see it on paper. I think I wanted a little more purple than that. So I'm going to add some more purple. Dab it out. I kind of like that. See, I like purple for shadows. So I'm going to come in here on the side of my house, and I just want to put like a nice soft shadow coming across the snow. Not too solid, okay? Now, if it gets starting to look like, oh, I have too much paint on there, all you have to do is take a paper towel and just dab it. That also adds a nice texture. Now, I'll probably come back in later and add a little bit more deepness right up by the barn. While I have just a little paint on my brush, though, I want to add some of these areas that make it look like the mountain has a little texture. So I just come in here and remember, not too much because this is snow. But I just add a few little, almost like little shadows in the snow. Now, if you start getting them too dark, all you have to do, get water on your brush and come back and just soften the lines with the water like this. Just kind of smudge them. Not too much water. I almost did too much water right there. But what I find is that you'll end up thinking that something's a mistake, and then I call that a happy mistake, because when you look back at it, you're like, I kind of like how that looks. So don't judge your artwork harshly, Okay, be gentle to yourself and be open. And sometimes you'll do things and you'll say, oh, I'm not sure. But then afterwards you're like, you know what? That looks really good. I like it. And then you can teach it to someone else. Okay, not too much, but see how the kind of purpley blue, if you look out at snow, you're always going to see some shadows in it. You're always going to see some irregular areas that don't look bright white. And that's what makes it look real and makes it look textured. Now, does it look exactly like this one? Nope. It doesn't look exactly like any of the ones that I did. Look at, I've done several of these in the last few days, and none of them look the same. And that's what's fun. And that's what I have found is that, and this one was done on watercolor paper. That's why it's so much brighter. That's a daytime scene though. But what I have found is that I don't get too caught up in feeling like, well, this has to be a perfect painting, because there's always going to be things that I don't like and things that I do like. I'm going to go back into the door and make it a little darker. A little bit more black paint. Okay, now this is fun. We're going to put these, get my painting back here, my sample, let it go. We're going to come back in and put some little weeds coming up through the snow, because most of the time when it snows, you're going to see that there's kind of some little foliage, some little like dry looking weeds that come up. So to do that, I'm going to mix a little bit of brown with some yellow, a little bit of green. Notice I'm not being too particular about things mixing together, am I? And then I'm going to test it out and see if I like the color. I like that. So what you might do is practice this on your paper, because it takes a little bit of skill. You have to have just the right amount of water in your brush, not too wet, not too dry. If it's too wet, just dab it. I'm not going to dab it because it's the right amount. And then you're going to touch and pull, touch and pull, touch and pull, because the weeds are thicker at the bottom where they come out of the snow, and then they go thinner. So it's just a very simple little process, but it can take some time. Like you want to regulate your pressure to be lighter at the end. So it's like touch down, pull up, touch, pull. And that's what makes them look thin and kind of wispy, okay? And not too much, but I just kind of do them now and then. And I kind of tend to put them where I have my little shadows coming through. And I might put another one kind of next to this one. And there again, you don't want things to look too patterny. Like you don't want it to look like wallpaper on the wall, right? Where it's all the same, straight across, exact same distance apart. You want to just vary them. You can put a little bit up by the house if you want. And then stop and look at it. Now you notice this one, it's all blobby. Why? Too much water. So I'm going to try to fix it, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. I just faded it out, and I'm going to just kind of go back over it. But don't get too caught up with any one piece of your painting, because when you're done, you're going to stand back and look at it, and it's going to be your overall view. Again, I did a little bit too much water here. But I'm not that concerned, okay? This one's still a little bloppy, right? Excuse me. So my problem is I need to let that spot dry. I'm gonna just leave it alone for a minute, let it dry, and I'll go back to it. You can do as many of these. These are actually fun. They're so fun to do that you're going to want to keep going, and you're going to be tempted to do a little too much. I'm going to take some of this same color and put it down here at the base of these trees. We call that seeding the trees so that they don't look like they're just floating. Just gives it kind of a natural look. And then in this little crevice here, a little bit of shadowing. Almost done. It's not perfect, but you know what? It doesn't have to be. Some of my lines are a little harsh here, so I'm going to come back with a little just plain water. And I'm going to soften some of these lines. Okay. Remember I talked about this shadow over here. I'm going to get a little bit more purple. I'm going to deepen this. And I don't want it, it's fine if it's smudgy. It's fine if it's not all even. It's going to make it look more natural. And sometimes you got to understand the paint just does what it wants to do, you know? Okay, now a couple last things. Where I put these little weeds, I'm going to make a little bit of a shadow right next to them. And the way I do that is I mix my purple with some of the water, some of the paint on my palette, maybe the blue, a little bit of brown, doesn't matter really. Just test it, make sure you're okay with the color. And then I just touch next to the weeds and I pull, touch and pull, touch and pull. So I'm actually pushing down the tip of the brush a little bit and then pulling away. So touch and pull, touch and pull. And you're going to notice that it gives it a really cool look because they all look like they have like a little shadow next to them. Because remember, the moon is coming from this side. See how that made them look like they belong there? Except for this guy, which I still need to work on. Okay. See anywhere else you might want to add a little more shadowing. Don't go too crazy with it. And then I'm going to see if I can't fix this weed right here. I'm going to dry it. I'm going to go back to that color that I mixed. Test it out. And let's see. Well, it's not perfect, but guess what? I'm going to leave it alone. Okay. Now, a couple things. You notice that I was not as careful as I could have been on the roof. So I have this little trick. This is acrylic craft paint that you can get at Walmart, Dollar Store, Michael's, anywhere like that. And this is really, really good for coming back in and kind of cleaning up the areas that you need to have white that weren't white, because the watercolor paint is not going to be thick enough to cover that. So here's what I'm going to do with my roof. I'm just going to dab some in, and I'm going to go along the top of my roof line, and I'm going to put it on pretty thick. This also adds a little bit of a texture to the roof, and or a thickness, like there's actual snow on it. And I'm going to go on this side and dab it like that. Go on this side. Now, if you don't have this craft paint at home, just next time you go to Walmart, I think it's like about $1, but just leave your paint. You can always add it later, okay? And like I said, I saw some of these at the dollar store the other day. Any kind of white acrylic craft paint. And you can even go in and kind of make this, play with this line here. Make it look a little more like snow. Okay. So that's another way you can clean up other areas of your painting that maybe you think got too blotchy or whatever. Don't worry too much about mistakes though, because sometimes the best mistake, the mistakes that you make end up being the best part of the painting. Okay, now I'm going to come back and I want to add my yellow for my windows, but I need to clean this up a little bit. So I'm just going to take my paper towel and get it wet, and I'm going to wipe out my yellow paint pan a little bit just to get back to that pure color and get some of that on my brush. And it's okay if it's not perfect yellow. I just don't want it to be like red or anything. Okay. Now, don't forget, you don't want too much water on that brush. You don't want it too wet. So I'm dabbing it, checking the color. Okay. Okay, I also noticed that I could use a little more shadowing in here, so I'm going to take a little more of my black and red. Keep forgetting to let you see what I'm doing here. Not too black, but just a little bit where it's a little bit darker. I'm going to pull it under here. See that? How it gives it dimension, makes it look like it's not just a flat surface. Okay, we're all done except for, I didn't do the chimney, but if you want to do the chimney, when your painting gets really, really dry, you can put the chimney in, but just be careful because if your red paint is too wet and your white paint blends into it, then you won't see the definition. Let me go ahead and dry this again. Okay, I think that's dry enough that I could go ahead and do the chimney for you. So I'm just going to get that red mix on my brush. And I'm just going to lay it in right here. And it kind of goes on a diagonal into the snowy part of the roof. It would have looked better if I had done it earlier on, but you get the point, right? Okay, now last thing. And this is something, again, that you will probably need to have your white craft paint for this. We're going to add some snow. Now you can do this either with a toothbrush, an old toothbrush, not one that you use, or a bristly brush like this. See how it's kind of bristly? And what we're going to do is we're going to mix some white paint with just a little water, and then we're just going to flick it right on our painting. Notice I have some water splotches on here already, and I'm just not a bit worried about that because it's just going to kind of all blend in and probably look like the snow. So I got my white paint. I'm going to dab my brush into it. And you're going to want to test this out, just a tiny bit of water, because you want to make sure that it's the right consistency. So you're just going to flick. Yeah, I'm good with it. And watch what happens. I'm just flicking it on my finger. So I'm starting to get snowflakes on there. And the reason that the craft paint works better is because if you have white in your watercolor, which I don't in mine, but if you do, it's going to be hard to get it thick enough to where it actually shows up. See that? And you're going to notice it shows up better on the darker areas. And that's why the night sky is very fun, the night painting, because you can really see the snow. I'm on the verge of going overboard, but there it is. If you have some spots that got to be too much, too big as flakes, a Q-tip is great for this. So you can come back in and kind of clean it up. But I actually don't worry too much about it because I think that all adds to it. If I live out here in Tehachapi, California, and last time it snowed, some of those snowflakes were huge coming down. So I just leave it as it is. The one last thing that I wanted to show you is that the roof of our house needs a little bit of dimension. It looks a little bit too flat. So I'm just going to go back. There's a spot on my paint pan where it's just some very fair kind of mixture of paint. And I'm going to come in and I'm just going to do a little light shadowing right here. It's very little, but look at the change that it brings. See how it just adds that little bit of dimension. And that's what I wanted to stress to you, that sometimes the lighter the touch, the better, because that's all I want to do. I don't want to add much more. I just want it to look like there's a little bit of a dimension, like this. The moon is shining more here, and there's a tiny bit of shadow. And then the last thing that I want to do is what every artist needs to do when they finish their painting, is that we need to sign it. And the other thing I like to do when I sign it is I like to put the date. Normally an artist will put just the year, but on this one, I'm going to put 2/5/21, because I want to know that I painted this on the 5th of February. And when I do more paintings like this in the future, I can go back and I can compare and see my improvement. So that's our lesson for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that you continue painting, and I look forward to working with you next time. Thank you so much for joining me. Oh, one last thing I want to show you. Now, this is really cool. I almost forgot to do this. Remember how we put this tape on here in the beginning? Normally I wait till it's fully dry, but I want to show you this. Peel it off very carefully. You don't want to pull up because you can tear your paper. But I'm pulling it like to the side slowly. And remember, I put the tape on my sweater to make it not sticky. So that way it's not going to rip up my painting. Notice that nice little edge though that it gives it. And this is really cool because if you don't have a frame, but you had put your tape on it, it looks like a little frame around it. And I just love that. I like the clean edge. Like that. And there it is. It has a beautiful clean edge all the way around. Again, thank you for joining me.